Dear friends and comrades, welcome in another fantastic debate of the Without Censorship, wbrew cenzurze, Polish independent internet channel. We've got very noble guests today, so please let me welcome Peter Ford, former British ambassador to Bahrain and Syria and deputy leader of the Workers' Party of Britain. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much. It's very good to be with Poland today.
Well, we are just after our independence day, and that's the day when all Polish hope that we regain our independence from the Western imperialists again. Please me also welcome our noble Scottish friends, Tommy Sheridan, former member of the Scottish Parliament and the strongest voice of hope over fear pro-independence campaign. Welcome, Tommy.
Hi, nice to be with you again, brother, and also to be with Peter. I should, for just accuracy for everyone, I'm also in the national executive of Alba, which is the party that was formed by the late Alex Salmond as a pro-independence party. Just to make that clear in case people say, well, Tommy, you never declared your political membership. So I'm with Alba. So my views will obviously be very pro-Scottish independence.
I'm privately very honored that we can welcome today Neale Hanvey, former member of the parliament and deputy leader of the Alba Party, so my own proud Scottish organization. Welcome, Neale. Thank you very much that you would like to join us.
Most welcome, Konrad. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
But first question, not exactly about Scottish issues, but about the problems of the British government. I must confess that I was old-fashioned Whovian a bit, and I remember from Doctor Who that it's very easy to remove British Prime Minister from the post. It could be done with 4 words only.
That's right.
Exactly.
Doesn't he look tired?
Exactly. And that's my question first, because every day brings us information that someone could replace Keir Starmer. Yesterday that was health minister. Today we read about that Miliband return, I believe, and so this series could continue. So do you think that Sir Keir Starmer looks tired?
Well, he doesn't necessarily look tired as such, but he looks out of his depth, out of control, and struggling, which I think is probably worse, because if somebody's tired, you can kind of forgive them. You always think, oh, it's a really hard job. They must be really trying their very, very best to look so tired. Actually, he looks incredibly well rested sometimes, but completely out of his depth. And out of touch and all of those things. So I think it's a deeper problem for Keir Starmer than just looking tired. And the background to that, of course, is that he won a thumping majority without really even trying, because the Conservatives were so unpopular that everybody wanted change, and they seemed like a safe bet. And the contrast between the thumping majority that Tony Blair got back in the late 90s and Starmer getting in the early 2020s is that Tony Blair had a vision. He talked about things getting better, and whether you agree with him or not, there was certainly a change of mood in the country. But Starmer entered Parliament without really much of a plan, and I think many of us feared that right at the beginning. And he has been dogged by fiasco after fiasco after fiasco, and he's not been able to respond to any of those problems with any confidence or ability. It just seems to have gone on and on and on. So I think he's in a hole that I think he's fallen into rather than dug a hole, because I don't think he's really done an awful lot. So he's fallen into a hole and he has no idea how to get out of it, clutching at straws this week in PMQs, and it was really difficult to watch.
So do they prepare to remove a Labour Party leader and the Prime Minister? Tommy, what do you think?
I read a poll recently which gave the public rating of the disgraced former Prince Andrew, one of the lowest ever recorded for a member of the royal family, showing the absolute decline of that archaic institution, and showing just how far this individual had fallen. The reason I mention it is because Keir Starmer's ratings were the same as his. That's how low this guy is now viewed within the UK public. This guy is utterly spineless, politically vacuous. He has no principles whatsoever. And all he has done since assuming power, and let's be absolutely clear about it, he may appear to be in power, but just like any ventriloquist doll, he has several hands stuck up his rear and are operating him from behind, because he is a voice of the elites. He is there to attack pensioners, to attack the disabled, but to defend the billionaires and the millionaires. So from my point of view, he is becoming so unpopular that the move to remove him isn't because he's not right-wing enough. It's because he's not popular enough with his right-wing policies. And that's why I think things are going to become more and more uncomfortable, particularly in 2 weeks' time, when they introduce a budget which is actually going to break one of their key promises, which was not to increase taxation. The guy's finished. He's a dead man walking, as far as I'm concerned.
Peter, we already acknowledged even some names. Media or in Labour informers said it could be the ones who started this plot. We read about West Streeting, we read about Shabana Mahmood, even Ed Miliband, Lucy Powell. Do you believe that even the closest allies of Keir Starmer could just stack him on the back?
No, I think his days are numbered. He's not just looking tired, he looks like the Walking Dead. He's a zombie. The only question is when the Labour apparatchiks will get their act together and shove him out of the window. He will eventually, though, be defenestrated, possibly after the Scottish elections next year, or after the British Council elections early next year. But at some point, probably in the next 6 to 8 months, he will be defenestrated. That's if Labour have any ambition at all to win a second mandate in 2028. Starmer has shown himself in his 17 months in power to be what we should have expected. As Tommy said, a person of no principles, perhaps more important, no charisma. He has absolutely no public persona to commend himself, not even, or especially not an aura of competence, at least. Mrs. Thatcher was hated, but she had an aura of competence. Starmer doesn't have that, so the only question is when he will be pushed out and who will replace him. But perhaps we can come to that question later.
Yeah, but do you think, for example, that is still Starmer or Labour in general able to, run forward? So for example, change the direction of its policy, not in the point where are not able, evidently, to do that as a taxation or finance, but for example, focus public opinion on elements like so-called migration crisis, Epping protests, so any kind of confrontation with the reform race. Do you think that they could change the discourse to save them from something which is undebatable in longer perspectives? What do you think, Peter?
No, I don't think they are like the captain of the Titanic, locked onto a course which will take them into the iceberg. They're locked into a course of high tax and high spend. Now, while socialists might not have too many problems with that, electorally, it's leading them to oblivion. We are days away from a budget which will raise taxes for almost everybody, directly or indirectly, taking taxes to yet another record level. Starmer has shown that he's not able to control his own backbench MPs who rebelled against welfare cuts. So there are no savings to be made in the massive and massively growing welfare bill. And he's also locked onto his green policies, which are decimating British industry, leading to record levels since 2020 of unemployment. He's locked onto that because it's the one part of his program which is popular with the Labour Party membership. And it's the membership who ultimately will decide who is the leader under the Labour constitution. So he cannot jettison these costly net zero policies, which give Britain the highest electricity prices in the world for industry and some of the highest for consumers. And this is one of the main things which is driving the economy towards the iceberg. The other thing is that he's locked into his international policies, his warmongering, because it's one area where the commentariat applaud him. He's given high marks for his warmongering and high or promises of higher defense spending. So there's no money to be saved for welfare by making defense cuts, which is what we in the Workers' Party would argue for. So no, he's on a collision course with an iceberg.
Yeah, well, someone could say that this government is only responding for the problems, but in the opinion of the other critics, it's also creating the problems because all the tax policy they started, the farmers issue, winter fuel problem. That's all. Everything was created by this government. Do you think that
it's the reverse? Yeah, so it's the reverse Midas touch. So instead of everything they touch turning to gold, it turns to something rather unpleasant and, with a bad odor. So everything they've tried to do has been a disaster. And I think it's easy to see why. Rachel Reeves put herself forward as an economist, and an economist she absolutely is not. And he's got a top team of people who are out of their depth. So Rachel from complaints, David Lammy, who thinks that you can grow a cervix if you're male. These people are just not serious at all, and everybody can see it. And that's a big problem.
As I remember, one of the first heroic moments in your political career was your campaigning against the poll tax. And that was the very beginning when you started to, combine this political activity and citizens' resistance towards the Westminster politics about the taxation. Do you think that this unpopular taxation movements of Keir Starmer, like, for example, extremely unpopular farmers' tax, it was, I believe, quite surprising for the Labour. They believed that they could, direct public opinion against the farmers and against the richest living in the countryside. But it seems to be that completely fail again, completely failure of the Labour politics and Labour propaganda as well. Do you think that now any wider movements against the taxation rise and any kind of wider coalition against this unpopular Labour politics is still possible. It's still possible, for example, to merge efforts of the Scottish pro-independence leftist parties and the parties like Workers' Party in Britain, like a new initiative of the Jeremy Corbyn, like Greens and others. Do you believe that it's still possible, or that these divisions are now too deep?
Well, the specifics are important. The issue that you've raised in terms of my own political development way back in the 1980s, when people like myself were involved with the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, now George Galloway, who was a Labour MP at the time, and George, on his way to an event in Dundee from Glasgow, had to call me on a very obscure early mobile phone device, because they weren't very well developed in those days, to ask me to go to his flat to defend it from sheriff officers. It's the equivalent of what they have in England called bailiffs. And these individuals are sent out to remove the furniture of people who don't pay particular taxes. In this case, it was the poll tax. And believe it or not, it was a Labour council. Strathclyde Regional Council was a Labour council, and they were sending out sheriff officers against a Labour MP to remove his furniture because he'd refused to pay a tax, which was described variously and almost unanimously as immoral, unfair, and unjust. That tax had that description, which meant it was much. I'm going to use the word easier. I've got to say it wasn't easy at the time, because it took an awful lot of effort and an awful lot of people. And we had to combat an awful lot of fear, because we were dealing with Thatcher at the time. But Thatcher made a crucial error. Up until then, she'd attacked the nurses, the steelworkers, the printers, the miners. She'd attacked them all individually, took them on, divided the movement, and was able to conquer. The poll tax attacked everyone. The only slight problem she had is she decided to make Scotland a guinea pig. We got it a year before England and Wales got it. So we got it in 89. They didn't get it till 1990. But she attacked everyone in Scotland, because that was a massive wealth transfusion from the poor to the rich. And it enabled us to unite people. The biggest recruiting sergeant during that campaign was poverty. It wasn't Tommy Sheridan or anyone else. It was poverty that brought us together. The reason I give that introduction is the farmer's tax doesn't have the same level of significance. The attack on the pensioners, the winter fuel payment being removed, the attack on the disabled, removing disabled benefits, it hasn't got the same universality that the poll tax had. And that's why it's always difficult to make comparisons between this campaign is going to be another poll tax. To be another poll tax, it would have to be something that was utterly universally unpopular and attacking everyone. That is not the same situation we are in just now. However, what we on the left would have to continue to promote, and the narrative from the mass media prevents this, but the idea that we should increase the taxes of ordinary people, but we're not touching corporation tax, we're not touching millionaires tax. The research from Unite, the union, shows that with just a minimal tax rate introduced on the super wealthy would generate as much as £25 billion extra to be spent on public services across the UK. That means that we can cut hospital waiting lists. That means we can cut homelessness. That means we can cut the scourge of low pay. And what we have to do is reject the right-wing answer to debt and introduce more sane, more logical, and more humane alternatives, which means redistribution of wealth, radical redistribution of wealth.
Yeah, well, when you mention about something which is, universal and popular, I would get the answer. The problem is, for example, which is, well, equally felt by majority of the people living in the British Islands. That's the problem of the rise of energy costs. Yeah, we faced against 2.4, as I remember, average increase in between October and December this year, and it's absolutely top of the European list of the increases of the energy prices in the United Kingdom, and in the same time, enormous profits of the energy companies, energy corporations are not touched by the British governments, and in the same time. However, Petro, you mentioned about it. We observe continuing activity of the British diplomacy in many areas of the world. So it's still growing spending on the Ukrainian conflict. Yeah, it's already 21.8 billion pounds spent on that, including 13.06 billion directly military. Help for Kiev regime. We could observe, of course, activity of Sir Keir Starmer in support of Zionist government providing genocide in Gaza, and it was this disgraceful activity of the usage of RAF Akrotiri Cyprus base, and we know exactly about increasing activity of the British corporations and diplomacy in Africa, in some kind of competition against the especially Chinese presence there. Do you think, Peter, that is some kind of the substitute of the lack of successes in the internal policy by this increasing spending? Especially when we know that, for example, when we hear about the military spending, it's not exactly about, for example, increasing production and creating workplaces somewhere in the Northern Ireland or somewhere, but it's about leasing, of advanced technologies and just finances transferred between the British budget and private corporations.
Well, the first point that has to be stressed is that the British public has very little interest in international affairs. I discovered this to my cost when I was campaigning in April in a by-election, a partial election for Parliament. And the Workers' Party are big on international issues, anti-imperialism, Middle East, zero interest at street level, not surprisingly. But this is the main thing, that people are far, far more interested in their wage packets, cost of living, security, in immigration, the health service. International affairs come way down the list. We can deplore this because many of our economic problems go back to our mismanagement of international issues. Our high energy prices are largely self-inflicted because of the sanctioning of Russia and cutting ourselves and Europe off from cheap Russian gas. Germany is also finding this to its cost, but the wider public is unaware, and it's very hard to make them aware when the great bulk of the mainstream media don't want to accept this basic truth. So it's not surprising that Starmer has gotten away with so much in international affairs. His mistakes of warmongering with Russia, taking us to the edge of war with Russia, taking us into a situation where we have to spend vastly more on useless armaments, and his support, including military support for Israel during the genocide. He's gotten away with this, because either the public didn't care or didn't realize, or in the case of much of the mainstream media, the right-wing media, they approved of it all. And he's been getting no opposition to his international policies in Parliament. Nobody in Parliament today, with minor exceptions for the Liberal Democrats, nobody takes issue with his key initiatives, his warmongering with Russia, his support for Israel, and his pandering to Donald Trump. He gets away with it all because there is no opposition. And it was a sad day when our leader, George Galloway, was narrowly defeated in the last general election a year and a half ago, removing one of the very few voices in Parliament for a sensible foreign policy.
And in the same time, when we read British newspapers, especially the right ones, you can think that, okay, there's no other problem in the United Kingdom than epic protests, asylum seekers, boat people, and so on. So it's exactly acting aside of the people's problem. So do you think that and that's the way how Labour is in fact responding for the actions created by the extreme right, by the reform, and by the right side media. So what's happened with Labour, in fact?
Yeah, well, I think it's to really understand that situation, you have to, zoom right out and look at global politics, because what's happening here is not dissimilar to the political changes that are happening in many countries. So we've seen it in the US with the swing to Donald Trump. We're seeing it in France with a swing away from Macron to the Front National, the French version of reform, if you like. We've seen it with Wilders in Holland. So there is a shift away from what I think was the consensus at the beginning of this century, which was a left-leaning centrist policy where, yes, there was support for the markets, but there was still, I suppose, a social democratic lean throughout politics. And I think the right felt that they were being dragged to the left, although they were probably still in the centre. And what we've seen since then is that the left have become so emboldened by their perceived command over the narrative in politics that in the last, I would say, decade, but certainly much more pronounced in the last 5 years, the left feel that they are in control of the narrative. And so they've come up with lots of policies that have, challenged many of us, whether that's, I'll pick an easy one, but the debate around sex and gender has been something that's blown up in the left's face. But it's also their economic policies have drifted to the left as well. And that's been damaging in lots of ways. And so because of this shift to the left, people in the centre have said, oh, I'm not going that far to the left. And they've looked around for anyone who will speak common sense to them. So they will perceive that, the position of those of us who, are still left-wing, I'm still a left-wing politician, but I'm not prepared to indulge ideologies such as that. And so some of them are listening to us, not enough, but many of them are listening to the loudest voices. And because, bringing it back into UK politics, because of the platform that has been gifted to reform, they're on every channel, on every bulletin, every day, and it is a huge political broadcast that they have every single day. And it's no surprise that they have picked on the obvious target, which is migrants particularly, and they have ramped up the temperature about that issue across the UK. Now, there may be pockets down south where, the influx, and it is an influx of illegal migrants and asylum seekers, that much of that rhetoric may be true of. But certainly in other parts, particularly Scotland, it's not so much of a pressure or a problem, but people up here have bought into that narrative where they are prepared to blame the migrant for all of the problems that they have, when actually it's just a very small part of the mix that does need to be tackled. And yeah, I think anyone would be foolish to say that there isn't a problem with inward migration. But that doesn't mean that there's a problem with anyone who is a migrant to the UK, because there are many people who have built their lives here. They have families, they've bought homes, they've started businesses, and they're a very important part of the fabric of their community. But there will be some who will now be pointing at them and tarring them with the same brush as the illegal migrants. And that's a very dangerous place to be. We've seen that play out in so many situations globally, and it's very, very dangerous. And I think that what I'm nervous about is the polarization that may flow from that. And that would be a very dark type of politics if we find ourselves there.
Yeah, well, first of all, of course, as one of the new Scots, I can strongly confirm that I was very warmly welcomed in Scotland, and I feel a part of the society of the Scottish nation as well. So I'm really proud of that. And it's absolutely, I must say, because I've got comparison with I can see the difference between the Scottish attitude toward newcomers and the situation down there in England. But in the same time, you mentioned about a very important element. I believe that a lot of commentators, analytics thinking about Brexit is seen only this anti-establishment element of that, or anti-migrant element, but wouldn't think about the great shift in the politics on the islands, and the situation where traditional left stopped to be traditional and shifted toward only, let's say, ideological, cultural issues, completely left all the background of the social issues of the worker class representation. So that was something which was, or also representation of the middle class, as was in the time of the New Labour, even when a lot of people of the middle class believed that this could be some kind of way of the middle for them. But another thing very important you mentioned is this element of promotion of the Reform UK, and this I would like promoting polarization. So shifting this American way of politics, that both sides of the barricade, accuse the other as traitors, people manipulated by the West of overpowers and so on. This polarization is also typical for Eastern European politics. We've got it in Poland, for example. And it was created also by the published broadcaster. I would say that after recent attacks of Donald Trump against BBC, and when I read that the BBC was left-shifted, I must smile. And I believe that a lot of viewers, especially in Scotland, smiled, because I don't remember a week without Nigel Farage in BBC. So where is this left shift in the published broadcaster? But yeah, there is a crisis of BBC is also symbol of the crisis of the British states. What can we do? And we in Scotland are really skeptical about BBC itself.
Yeah, I mean, I put out a tweet this week about the BBC bias and all of the brouhaha, which was well deserved. I think I saw that clip a number of times where the two separate things that Trump said were put together, they were stitched together. And I really believed that was the flow of the speech, because I didn't watch it live, I didn't see the whole thing. And it was presented in a way that certainly made it sound like it was continuous. Now, back in the during the independence referendum, there was a rather infamous BBC report where the reporter, his name just escapes me. He's still on Radio 4 Today programme regularly, political editor at that time. I just can't get his name together at the moment. But is it Nick Robinson? Yeah. So he said that Alec didn't answer a question that Alec gave him a very detailed answer to. And there was a lot of outrage from the indie camp, obviously, at that time, but there was no reporting of it anywhere else. So there's a little bit of a, wry smile on my face when there's all of this fuss about Donald Trump being misrepresented, when actually the BBC misrepresented the arguments of the independence movement on a daily basis. They were absolutely 100% top to bottom biased against independent Scotland. And so that is a fundamental problem. So I'm not surprised that they misrepresented Donald Trump. I'm not surprised that they did it to him, because they are part of this far left push. And, going back to what I was saying at the beginning, we have a situation, just like in any significant change in society, where there's a paradigm shift and there's a rebalancing of where people sit politically. You always get turbulence within that change until the new consensus lands, and it's very difficult to predict where that new consensus will be. Now, you can have things that have massive impact on that. So back in the 30s, because of the armistice and the penalties that Germany paid after the First World War, they felt embittered and hostile. And that really fueled the rise of Nazism and Adolf Hitler. So you get extremes like that, but you also, you can make probably similar arguments about the French Revolution, that, it's very difficult to predict where the paradigm shift is going to land and how much turbulence there's going to be there. But we've seen lots of examples of that turbulence. There's the seismic shift away from the left in the US and back to Trump. I mean, I don't think anybody could see that coming. I had a sense from attending conferences and speaking to people on the right that they were confident he was going to win. I didn't share that optimism, but it wasn't completely out of the blue for me. But you see this shift to the right all across Europe, and I think that it's going to be very difficult to predict how that's all going to play out. The difficulty for Scotland in terms of the independence campaign and mounting that narrative. I mean, as we've discovered in Alba, we do not get fair coverage in the media. It has limited our ability to reach political discourse. Everything that we've done, we've achieved ourselves, and that's very frustrating. What's also very frustrating is that the party of independence, the SNP, a party that was very special to many of us in Alba, not least Alec, who brought it from the fringe into the mainstream and into government, has, utterly lost its way. I know people get angry with me because I say things like that, but, I've been at the heart of the discussion, the internal discussion, debate in the SNP group. And I know, sadly, and frustrating as it is, I know they're not interested. They're just not interested. And so the very real risk is that, having assumed that the people of Scotland would always return the SNP in years past, And I think still working on the assumption, and probably it's true, that the majority of Scots will still vote SNP and return them as the main party. The fact that the SNP have, first of all, spent more of their time attacking us than anyone else, and they've now allowed Reform to get a foothold in Scotland. And it looks like, we may be losing a lot of Labour and Tory MSPs, but we're going to get an unknown quantity of Reform MSPs who will, it now seems very likely, be part of a political party that is in power in Westminster in the not too distant future. And I don't think for a second that Nigel Farage, or indeed any Reform leader of the future, is going to entertain cutting Scotland loose, because the minute they get into public office or into political office in Westminster, they will understand fully the importance of Scotland as a cash cow to the UK Treasury, and any suggestion that they will improve devolution is frankly for the birds. They will want to keep the income coming in from Scotland, and they will want to push any unpopular things like nuclear dump sites and the nuclear weapons that are on the Clyde. They will leave all of that stuff for Scotland to endure. They will not do anything to improve the quality of life in Scotland. And I think there's a very real concern that a Farage administration in Westminster would move to either reduce the authority of the Scottish Parliament or abolish it altogether. I think abolishment would be incredibly difficult, because that referendum was won on a massive percentage. So it would be, I think, might be ultimately helpful for us, because if they try to take our parliament away, I think it will activate many people in public life to say, not on your Nelly, if you're going to do that, we'll have all of the powers of an independent country. Thank you very much. And so, but again, go back to what I said, we're in a state of flux globally, and I think it's very difficult to predict where we'll land.
We have to pay homage to a journalist who I had the privilege of calling a friend, someone who broke all sorts of new ground in journalism during his life, John Pilger, who's sadly no longer with us, who once very accurately described the BBC as the most refined and professional propaganda organisation on the planet. And we have to understand, in terms of what Peter has earlier said about the place for foreign affairs and international relations in the minds of the British public, it's largely due to the propaganda that they receive on a daily basis from the corporate media, who are nothing more, nothing less than puppets of the Western elites. And they feed daily a diet to the British people that Russia is about to attack. Russia is about to, I was at school in the late 1970s during the Cold War, when we were told in modern studies classes that Russia was a threat because they had so many nuclear weapons, and that's why they had so many SALT agreements and so much discussion. But we had to fear that Russia was about to invade. We used to make the point, we used to joke with each other at school, for goodness sakes, why would Russia invade Glasgow? It's pouring every day. What do you want to come to Glasgow for? And of course, that was a way of making fun of a ridiculous but yet very, very serious situation that has returned with a vengeance. We have literally a uniformity in our media and in our political stage telling us that we should fear Russia, that we should be Russia-phobic. We have just yesterday had the Remembrance Day celebrations, and we have these warmongers shamefully standing with the red poppies on their lapels. And that red, of course, is coloured in the blood of over 1 million Ukrainians killed because the West wants to try and destroy Russia. Nothing to do with Ukraine's sovereignty or Ukrainian people. They couldn't give a damn. What they want to do is exhaust and defeat Russia. And it's not happening. Russia is winning that war hands down. There is no doubt about that, regardless of the propaganda that we receive. And from our point of view, our job has to be to say, how dare you remember the defeat of the Nazis in the Second World War without remembering the role of the Russians in that defeat? Because if it wasn't for them, then we wouldn't have been able to defeat Hitler. The Eastern Front is what broke the back of the Nazis, and we should never, ever forget that, despite the propaganda from the British and the Americans who will tell us, oh no, it was us that actually won the war. The Russians, with enormous sacrifice beyond any of the other allies, they're the ones that won that war. And I refuse, and we should refuse collectively, to become Russia-phobes because of a manufactured conflict in Ukraine that was started in 2014 with an American-inspired bloody coup and is continuing now with the loss of Ukrainian lives needlessly. People like Peter and I and others on the socialist left, and by the way, it's not always uniform, Peter will be able to testify to this. On the left, there are still some people who say, oh no, we should defend Ukraine. I'm not prepared to defend a fascistic state, which is what Ukraine actually is, a corrupt state. It was labelled that before the 2022 special operation by Russia. Ukraine was universally labelled the most corrupt state in the world, not just in Europe, in the world. But now, of course, we are to spend billions to defend that corrupt state. So we have to try and dig deep, collectively, use forums like this, try and spread the word that we do not have an interest in trying to undermine Russia. Not at all. Russia is not a threat to us. America is a threat to us. What's happening in Venezuela right now is a threat to us. Those are much bigger threats than what's happening in Ukraine.
Yeah, I believe that, Peter, that's exactly what has happened to George Galloway recently when he returned from the civic diplomacy forum in Moscow. And he, the former, for many years, member of the parliament, was kept for many hours in the airport and investigated by the so-called airport police, which is exactly another name of MI5, just simply. I believe that it's another example that we miss the moment when, for example, together with anti-terrorist restriction, the Anti-Terrorist Act 2018, and these new changes, we now live in the states where Magna Carta is not longer valid, so it's not a point when we can even call for our civic rights. And exactly after any pro-Palestinian manifestation with these thousands of people arrested just for T-shirts they wear, we can observe that it's not only the problem of the government or the politics of one party, but it's the decline of the liberal democracy itself, parliamentary liberal democracy in Britain itself. Do you think that we can still act in the realities of the more restrictions, more limitations, more strict censorship? What else can we do, Peter?
Well, we're living in very interesting times in Britain. And possibly similar times in France and one or two other countries. The foundations of our liberal democracy are shaking. And they're partly being given a good shake by Donald Trump, the arch populist. And almost worldwide, there's a huge earthquake of populism going on. And it's beginning to be felt on these shores. in Britain. And it's quite symbolic that the BBC have met their nemesis in the form of the American tyrant, the American populist. They've gotten away with so much else, but the one thing they were not going to get away with was trying to undermine the populist over on the other side of the Atlantic. And the foundations of the system are shaking all over. The BBC itself is one of the foundations of the liberal democratic order in Britain and arguably the wider world. The institution of monarchy, through several scandals itself, is increasingly looking shaky. The two-party system is definitely extremely shaky, with both Labour and the Conservatives lagging in the polls behind our own domestic populist party, Reform. What's missing is a left populist entity. I mean, I would argue, and George Galloway, I think, would agree that the Workers' Party represent the left populist strand of workerism and leftism. But we're not making very much headway. Other parts of the left are very far from being populist. They're enemies of populism. They are essentially middle class, and they indulge luxury beliefs like the wickedness of Russia and the virtue of Ukraine. So these are turbulent, feverish times, feverish times in this country, and the BBC crisis is likely to shake the foundations quite a bit more than it seemed in the first days, especially with Trump insisting that he has an obligation to sue this revered institution, which is up there in Britain with the monarchy and the NHS, and one of those institutions now under threat.
Yeah, of course, it's hard to make direct analogies, but in fact, yeah, we can compare the situation for example, during the Great Crisis in the West in the 30s, and what we can expect as the next great crisis of the capitalism, probably just forthcoming in the years forward. And well, another similarity was that in the 30s, a lot of national governments preferred any kind of international activity just to escape to the internal problems, and we can see that also in the United Kingdom when we see Sir Keir Starmer, creating a coalition of will about Ukraine, supporting Bibi Netanyahu in the genocide in Gaza. Staying just behind Trump, even despite any differences between them. So he's very active internationally. The much less active he is internally. That's the point. And we can expect that the Reform UK, with all this entourage of recreating British proud and nearly empire, they could just follow these steps and even increase these effects. My question is: do you believe that some kind of the breakthrough or of element of changing this, at least for Scotland, could be our election, Holyrood election next year? Do you think that, because, well, you mentioned that it's dangerous that after the general election, so the latest 2029, as I remember, Nigel Farage could co-create or even create Westminster government. But could you imagine, for example, Reform as main opposition on Holyrood? And the point is, can we be this element? Could be, for example, this impulse for the British politics, for example, for change of the prime minister, make an election before 2029. Can we start the change in Scotland?
Well, it's an uphill struggle, and for reasons that are largely out with our control within the Alba Party. But it's a very simple situation, and the answer to this, or the outcome of this, is firmly in the hands of SNP supporters. So if SNP supporters vote for the SNP on the regional list, they will all but guarantee that the Reform Party will be the main party of opposition in Scotland. That is just a simple fact. At the current moment, the SNP are around about 20% on the regional list in terms of public support. If that's what they were to achieve in a formal election next year, that would deliver absolutely 0 seats, no further MSPs. They would not win anything, and every one of those votes would be completely wasted. And the reason is that every time they win a regional constituency seat, so if they win a constituency in the regional competition or contest, their vote on the list gets diluted, and it continues to be diluted with every other constituency success. And so once they have secured the constituency vote, their regional list vote is effectively worthless. It's been diluted so far, and the unionist parties swing in at the back of that. Now, if you look at 2021, the SNP got over 1 million votes on the regional list. They got 2 additional MSPs. The Conservatives got just over 600,000 votes on the regional list, and they got, I think, 26 MSPs because their vote share was not diluted. Now, you can allow the Reform parties that seem to be doing everywhere to replace the Tories if you vote SNP. Whereas if you vote Alba, then you will get more independent supporting MSPs in, and you will lock the Reform Party out of the Holyrood Parliament. It's an incredibly simple position, and what is frustrating is that there are some who would rather see, it seems, reform returned to Holyrood than Alba MSPs returned. And I'm talking about people who are in the independence movement, who absolutely understand that voting SNP is a completely wasted vote. And so that's the big challenge. I mean, in the recent Fife by-election, we didn't do particularly well on first preferences, but let's be honest, the reason for us contesting by-elections is not really to try and win them. It's to understand where second vote transfers are coming from and going to. And we got 41% transfers from the SNP to us. So if that was to happen in a Scottish Parliament general election, then that would cut the number of Reform MSPs that were elected and increase significantly the number of independent supporting MSPs from the Alba Party into Parliament. So, I really don't understand why, I would hope that people in politics have got thick enough skin not to be, vindictive and territorial. Unfortunately, there seem to be some people who behave in that way. I got involved with the SNP and now with Alba because I'm desperate to see independence delivered for Scotland. That is the only reason I'm involved in politics. I have no real need to be doing any of this. I could be sitting with my feet up, watching telly and amusing myself with other hobbies. But this is so important for the future of the country, the future of my children and other young people, that I will continue to do it as long as there's a chance. But I think, I saw a post on Twitter this morning from someone who's been campaigning hard for over a decade, say, I'm beginning to lose any faith that we'll ever achieve independence. And it's what's doubly frustrating is that there were so many brilliant opportunities between 2016 when the Brexit vote took place and now, and none of them were utilised. In fact, they were absolutely squandered. So, you know, there's always hope, Konrad, and I will always try my very best to advance things, but it's very difficult when the movement refuses to apply the same level of critical thinking that they did during the referendum. We all seem to have got into some kind of silo thinking, and it's, you know, disappointing, but, you know, we're not done yet.
Yeah, I believe that speaking about the British political crisis, we can also we need to observe and discuss the problem and the issue of new political movements, or the reborn of some political movements themselves. We can observe, of course, the race of the reform, and we can see that this increase is also going on in Scotland and in Wales, which is quite surprising. It was stopped by Plaid Cymru in Wales. It's not as significant as in England, in Scotland, but still, well, together with Tommy, we can observe that when we are doing canvassing in Scotland, we can hear the voices that, okay, if you do not deliver the answers, if not one of the establishment party is able to deliver any answer for the people fears or complaints about the system, so they could turn to the populists. So this race is still dangerous. In the same time, we can see that there is some kind of increase in voting intentions for Greens, which is an element of the Labour crisis in England. It's a bit different in Scotland about the Scottish Greens, I would say, and of course we all know that we still have to wait for what exactly your party is to be. As for now, we can see that it's very inclusive about, for example, issues of gender recognition and things like that, but more exclusive when Zara Sultana said about social conservatism or any kind of this kind of attitude of the left. So we still need to figure out how your party will be looking out. But well, the point is, do you believe that these new political movements could be in rise in the next election? We can check it with the Scottish election next year and with English local election. Tommy, do you think that, for example, can we have reform MSPs in Scotland next year?
Well, first of all, I have to suggest that the lifespan of Keir Starmer might be less than what Peter had suggested earlier. I actually think there will be an increasing move before May of next year to remove Starmer before the Holyrood elections. Because if Starmer is still in place at the time of the Holyrood elections, Labour in Scotland will be wiped out. There's no doubt in my mind that Labour in Scotland will be wiped out. Even without Starmer, they're going to be in for a very, very difficult ride. But with Starmer, they will be wiped out. And they will be wiped out largely because they will have a pincer movement on their vote. The movement on their vote will come from left of Labour in the shape of the Greens, who are already established in the Scottish Parliament and in most recent opinion polls are being tipped to increase their representation, regardless of their madness, their gender self-identity cult and madness. Despite all that, people see other things in terms of their attack on the billionaires, their attack on wealth inequality. And in many respects, the Scottish Greens, quite unfairly, have picked up support on the back of the English Greens and the increased exposure of the guy Zach, who has come across well in the media because he's tried to put the spotlight away from immigrants who aren't causing poverty to the billionaires who are causing poverty. So he has been effective in a media point of view. But the other part of the pincer movement on the Labour vote in Scotland will come from reform, because it's a unionist vote, and it's a right-wing unionist vote. The other party that will be wiped out is the Tories. The Tories will be wiped out in Scotland. There's no doubt in my mind that they're going to get wiped out anyway, regardless of what happens with Labour. But that impinging on the unionist vote will affect the Labour Party as well as the Tory Party. Reform, I believe, will have representation in the Scottish Parliament, which is a disgrace, and they will be exposed. Most of them will be ex-Tories, because at the end of the day, when you scratch a Reform politician, you will find that the gangrene, the Tory gangrene, is underneath the skin. That's what they are. They're just a more extreme form of Toryism that couldn't espouse their racist views so clearly when they had the Tory label on. So they removed that label, put on the Reform label, and now they can be outwardly racist, which was what they always were, but they had to hide it. They will pick up, I think, some desperate votes from those on the right of politics in Scotland. We have people on the right. Scotland is primarily a left of centre country. There's no doubt about that. And it will remain a left of centre country. But that doesn't mean there aren't right-wing elements there. And a lot of those right-wing elements will coalesce around unionism and the defence of Britain, the promotion of British unionism. And sadly, the left, we have got differences that can sometimes be fundamental. I wish that the left in England would be as willing to recognise the right of self-determination for Scotland as it is rightly recognising for Palestine, for Cuba, for Ireland, for Venezuela. We have a right of self-determination as well. And the left in England, I think, ignores that at its peril. The reason Plaid Cymru, I think, was able to stop Reform recently in a by-election where Reform was tipped to win is because they actually play clearly to a left-of-centre nationalism, which says nationalism doesn't have to be right-wing. The Bolivarian nationalism of Venezuela is not right-wing. It's actually left-wing. And we have to recognise that nationalism isn't always right-wing, isn't always reactionary. It can be progressive, as it has proven in Cuba, as it has proven in Chile, as it has proven in Venezuela. And if you look at Scotland and the independence marches in Scotland, that's where you'll find the banners saying welcome refugees. That's where you'll get the banners saying ban nuclear weapons. So the independence movement in Scotland is primarily progressive and left of centre. And I think we have to encourage that development in the Holyrood elections in May.
I would say that it's much more simple question for you, but in fact much more complicated. So what is the perspective of the left in England? Do you think that it's still a perspective that is only related to your party activity, or do you think it's still something which had to be developed?
Well, on the left in England, we're all waiting for Godot. The famous expression, the famous literature, the famous play of Samuel Beckett. We're waiting for Godot, and Godot is Corbyn to get himself organised in his vehicle called provisionally Your Party. He's been talking about forming this party for the best part of half a year. It's gone up like a souffle in the kitchen, and I'm afraid it will come down like a souffle as well. It will probably implode. They were going to have a sort of inaugural meeting this month. That's not happening. There are many internal divisions. Corbyn has a rival in the shape of a Muslim woman called Sultana Ahmed. And it's all a big mess. I mean, none of us who are ex-Corbynistas ourselves are surprised about this, because although we may have supported Corbyn at one point, we never admired his organizational skills. So the left in England is in disarray. There is no effective leftist opposition to the Labour Party, which is leaving a massive gap for Reform, who are being surprisingly successful in making themselves appeal to the working class, largely on the back of an appeal to anti-migration sentiment and spurious patriotism. These votes that ought to be going to the left populists are being hoovered up by Reform. And I'm afraid, looking forward, I don't see many reasons to think that that's going to change. Maybe next year, Corbyn, maybe Godot will appear on the stage, and it will prove to be a massive disappointment. But Labour certainly are imploding, and the pieces are being picked up largely by actors on the right.
Leading to the conclusions, dear friends, could you dare to present any kind of prognosis for the United Kingdom? Well, in the perspective of, let's say, I believe that 5 years is maybe too much, because I think that no one now believes that it would be full term for the present parliament. But still, in the perspective which we could assume how it would be, it's not only about the political system, it's not about only future of Sir Keir Starmer, which is, I believe, already known for everybody. It's just a question of time. But how could you think about the perspective of the British state and British economy in perspective of, let's say, next 3 years? Tommy, what do you think?
It's hard to ask me these questions, brother, because as far as I'm concerned, I want to break the British state. I've got no interest in maintaining British imperialism. I want to break the British state right down the middle. I want Wales to be free. I want Scotland to be free. And I want England to be free. I think once England is free, the left can rediscover their very, very militant and principled traditions, the Chartists, the early trade union movement. The left has a DNA in England that has not properly developed because they have, in my opinion, far too often tried to defend a British state, which I think is completely anarchic and outmoded and represents nothing but colonialism and imperialism. I believe the British flag itself is a flag dripped in the blood of many, many conquerors and exploitations and rapes across the world. Therefore, I don't want anything to do with that British flag. I do believe Scotland has a future economically, socially. You talked about energy earlier. It's very, very sad for me to be able to tell you that Scotland produces more than enough energy for everyone in Scotland. We could give energy away free. We have so much energy. And I don't just mean traditional energy, I also mean clean energy as well. We are exporting energy, not just to England, but mostly to England. So we have a future in Scotland, as does England, as does Wales. But those futures have to be fought for on the basis of putting forward a very solid left of centre political prospectus, which is about putting people before profit, about telling everyone that health service is an example of socialism. We should have that on our railways. We should have that in our finance system. We should have that in our energy production, in water production. In England, water, believe it or not, is privatised. I mean, in Scotland, ours isn't privatised. But we have private companies polluting the people of England every single day and getting paid billions of pounds to do it. It is absolute madness. We need a prospectus that says England could be a very progressive country, but it must put forward progressive policies in a radical way that says loud and clear, stop getting on about small boats and start getting on about super yachts, because it's the super yachts that are bringing in the billionaires who are dividing society, who are profiteering at the expense of ordinary working class people. Stop being anti-human and start having a bit of compassion and empathy for fellow human beings. That's the type of message that I think will get across, particularly to the young people. Because my final point is this, and Peter and I have quite rightly talked about some of the darkness in relation to the political scene, not just in England, but across Scotland and Wales as well. But I would have to say there is a wee antidote to that. And it's important to make this point. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, apparently 500,000 people have signed up for the Corbyn project. Now, that is a source of joy. Peter and I have criticisms of the Corbyn project, particularly their gender self-ID madness. That is just ridiculous. I also have the criticism that they're not for Scottish independence either. But most people signing up to the Your Party are signing up on the basis of the radical wealth redistribution, public ownership message that Jeremy is putting out there. And I think that's a source of encouragement for everyone who is of the left, everyone who is a socialist, that there is some chinks of light in the darkness.
Peter, and what's your opinion about the perspective of the British state and the British left? I'm really, really grateful for your participation. Thank you very much, dear comrades. Our noble guests were today Peter Ford, former British ambassador to Bahrain and Syria and deputy leader of the Workers' Party of Britain. Thank you very much, Peter.
Well, I think there's more hope for Scotland than for the British Isles or the United Kingdom, because Scotland does enjoy a measure of autonomy. But I'm pessimistic about the future of Britain. I think it was the economist Adam Smith who said, there is a lot of ruin in nations, by which he meant that a country embarked on the wrong path could carry on that path for a long time, frittering away its assets. That's happened in the case of Argentina in the 20th century, a country that used to be up there with Europe and descended to the level of the third world. That is the course that Britain is on, I believe. And there's also a lot of ruin in parliaments. It's really quite difficult to get rid of a parliament. It has to have an active desire for suicide. And I can't see those Labour MPs, several hundred Labour MPs, as turkeys voting for Christmas. So it's quite hard to see how mechanically, constitutionally, the dissolution of Parliament could come about. It's much easier to envisage Labour under new leadership, maybe someone like Wes Streeting, who comes across as a bit of a street fighter with a sense of humour, a cheeky chappie from North London, certainly a lot more charisma than the charisma-free robot we have at the moment, Starmer. I can see Labour limping on and then being decimated in 2028. And Nigel Farage will be our Prime Minister.
Well, I wouldn't call that optimistic ending, but it's still, I believe, strongly realistic. And that's the fact that's our intention to always give our viewers the message of truth, even if this truth is really hard. I believe that it was Jim Sellars who said that it was, very hard struggle for Scotland, because for the British right is a question of existence of United Kingdom, of position in the Security Council of the United Nations, Treasury, as you said. At the same time, we believe that it's also hard. It was hard for the English left to let us go, because they wanted to have leftist Scottish voters supporting some kind of British leftist government as well. So that was the double trap for Scotland. But well, I don't ask you about any perspective for the United Kingdom, because we both believe that Scotland finally will be outside the kingdom of England, and that will be our own sovereign voice. But just asking for the realist, maybe not optimist, but realist perspective for Scotland in next couple years, not only this election coming next year, but in the future. Because, well, can we still say, as the next Jim book title is, that there are still reasons for optimism for Scottish people?
Well, there's optimism, there's hope, and there's both misplaced optimism and false hope. So I think what I'm concerned about is, going back to the silo thinking. So when the Alba Party first came into being, I mistakenly believed that the independence movement would immediately get it, that this is the way to solve the problem with unionists in the Scottish Parliament. Let's do that, and then we get independence, and then we all go and form our own Scottish parties from whatever political persuasion. So the resistance to that was disappointing. The lack of focus and commitment to the independence project from Nicola Sturgeon and Humza and now John, and the lack of any real strategy is also disappointing. But I think, the thing that really frustrated me most during Nicola's time as First Minister was that she made a whole range of different commitments in terms of dates. People got excited, they went out and marched, then they were let down, then they were told there was a new date, then they got excited. Fewer went out and marched, and then they were let down. And, I think the pandemic eventually killed off much of that enthusiasm. And the marches have been better, but, it's not had the same energy or enthusiasm as it once did. And you can only lead people on so many times. I think I would think this because it's a strategy I've been part of forming, but the position that we've taken in terms of using an election as the democratic mechanism to give force to the voice of the people of Scotland is the only way forward. And it's also the only one, not only is it the only one that makes sense, it's the only one that fits the expectation of the international community in terms of democratic legitimacy. And it's the only approach that would put any question of that legitimacy beyond doubt, because you can't, no one's going to opt out of a Scottish parliamentary election, but you can ask that question then. Now, you could have a confirmatory referendum at some later stage. That's a different part of the question, but that proposal is consistent with the advice that Professor McCorquodale provided for me when I was doing the Scotland Self-Determination Bill, and it's excellent advice within that legal opinion. but it's also been shown to be correct recently with the rebuttal or rebuff or falling out is probably a better way to put it, between Salvo Liberation and the legal team that they were working with the UN. And, you know, it irks me because what effectively that said was that a small group, however impassioned and correct they may be in their arguments, cannot act out with or without the support of, however that's expressed, the Scottish people. You can't. It doesn't matter. You can be as right as you like all day long, but unless you've got democratic force behind your argument, you are nowhere. And so I think the step-by-step approach, I might not agree with JPTI. I might not agree with them in every on every point, but what I do absolutely agree with them is that, you know, without democratic legitimacy, you're having a conversation and that's it. And there's no place to say, you know, there's no way you can go, nope, I'm not speaking to these people. I'm not engaging with the UK government. We're just going to say we're independent. Well, it doesn't work that way. And it never will work that way. You know, there's two ways to do it. You either follow democratic debate and discourse, and you convince the population that your way is the correct way, and you do that peacefully, as Alec, you know, did so brilliantly in 2014. It was the most engaging political project I think I've ever seen in my life. I don't know, there was probably some tensions here and there, but not really anything of a concern. Or you do what happened in Ireland, which I don't think anybody in the independence movement wants, which is you have an uprising, as they did in Dublin, and then you have a bloody conflict over decades between the two different sides. Now, the difficult thing is that when I was putting forward the Scotland Self-Determination Bill, I had a discussion with some of the Ulster Unionists, not about that, but we were talking about the mechanism within the Northern Ireland has a 7-year cycle of a border poll, which is effectively their version of an independence referendum, but it's to unite the country again. And so that mechanism is very straightforward. It's a tiny paragraph that would be added to the Scotland Act. And so what they had said is, you know, well, you can't do that. You know, you got to protect the integrity of the United Kingdom. I said, well, you've got that out of the Good Friday Agreement. So how is that remotely fair? And they said, well, the things are not the same at all. And I said, no, they're not the same, because your position suggests that violence works. And my position is that democracy and debate is the right approach. So the message some people might get from this is, you better pick up arms, guys, because that's the only way. And I reject that entirely. Because I've seen, I mean, you're talking about being a New Scot. I'm a New Scot as well. I was born in Belfast. We moved here when I was 7. I remember the terrorism in Ireland when I was a kid. That's no way forward for Scotland. But the current message from the UK government and unionists is that you don't get the democratic process you want unless you resort to violence. And that's a dreadful message.
And I believe that it's the conclusion, because even the critics of the United Kingdom never wish people living here any kind of internal armed conflicts or the civil war. Absolutely not. And but it's also the test for the democracy in the United Kingdom, which is, well, for now in doubt when we observe the situations with the massive arrests of the people supporting Palestine, and then any other actions of government leading to surveillance, to the better control, to censorship even. So it's not a great perspective. I'm really, really grateful for your participation. Thank you very much, dear comrades. Our noble guests were today Peter Ford, former British ambassador to Bahrain and Syria and deputy leader of the Workers' Party of Britain. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Our noble guest was Neale Hanvey, a former member of parliament and the deputy leader of the Alba Party. Thank you very much again. Thank you, Neale.
Thanks very much.
And Tommy Sheridan, former member of Scottish Parliament, one of the pro-independence campaigners in Scotland and member of National Executive of Alba Party. Thank you, Tommy.
The pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation.
And see you soon on the next Brew Censorship without censorship interviews. Thank you very much.